Okay, we're now recording, and I would just like to ask that everyone who is not a speaker, please stay muted until well, actually all the way through the event. So good afternoon, and thank you everybody for joining us today for our panel on maximizing academics' effectiveness in working with journalists. My name is Julia Sass-Rubin, and I am a professor at Rutgers and one of the co-leads of the New Jersey, Philadelphia chapter of the Scholar Strategy Network. I'm just gonna stop for 1 second and let someone in. There we go. The other chapter co-lead is Professor Susan DeJarnett. There you are, who is also moderating today's event, and she is a professor at Temple University Law School. I also would like to introduce our chapter fellows. Stephanie Holcomb, if you could just wave, and Lauren Nolan, both of whom are doctoral students at Blaustein School at Rutgers, and also Gabrielle Christopher, who is a first-year Master's of Public Administration student at the University of Pennsylvania Fels Institute of Government. So as many of you know, the Scholar Strategy Network, which is the organization that organized this event, is an organization of university-based scholars who are committed to using research as evidence to improve policy and strengthen democracy. There are over 30 chapters of SSN. We are one of those across the country. And SSN researchers work with civic leaders, policymakers, and journalists, i.e. today's panel, to ensure that policymaking is informed by research. In addition to events like today's, members of SSN have access to various forms of really helpful assistance from the national staff and other events organized by the chapters. For example, one-on-one coaching with placing op-eds and connecting with journalists, assistance with building relationships to bring researchers together with policymakers and staffers in DC and the state capitals, assistance with developing design and execution of research projects, participation in cross-state issue-specific research initiatives, etc. So to join SSN, if you're not already a member, I know many of you are, you just fill out a brief form on the website, and I will put the link in the chat, and then you submit something you've written that is policy-oriented, but not an academic journal article. You can write something specific for this or something you've written recently, like in the last 6 months. So with that, we will be holding questions until the end, and you can put them into the chat at any time, and I will read them after the interviews are done. And with that, let me turn it over to Susan.
Thanks, Julia, and thank you to everybody who's participating today, but especially our 3 panelists who I'm really pleased to be able to introduce and get a chance to talk with today. And they are Nancy Solomon. Nancy, wave or something so people can see you. Nancy is a senior reporter for WNYC, the public radio station in New York and New Jersey. She was the founding editor of New Jersey Public Radio, the station's news bureau covering the state. And she was a freelancer for National Public Radio for 15 years before that. She's a 2-time Peabody Award winner. She lives in Maplewood, New Jersey with her wife and kids, and in a previous life was married to a Rutgers sociology professor who often strived to get her work read by a larger audience. So I guess you can be an expert from both sides of the fence, which is great. Our next panelist is John Mooney. John, wave. John is the founding editor of New Jersey Spotlight News, starting the news site in 2009 after more than 30 years in print journalism. The site has won numerous awards since its launch, including in general excellence from the Online News Association. Before New Jersey Spotlight, John was an education reporter with the Newark Star Ledger and the Bergen Record, and a contributing writer for the New York Times. Our last but not least panelist is Cassie Haynes. Hey. Cassie is, and correct me if I've got this wrong, the co-executive director of Resolve Philly. And I'm going to leave it to Cassie to start, when we get to the more interview portion, to explain Resolve, which is really exciting and a little different than a traditional news outlet, but she's been a leader in social innovation and business strategies since 2012, holding executive leadership positions with the city of Philadelphia and a variety of startups at the intersection of health and fitness industries. In a past life, she was executive director of the global governing body of Flat Track Roller Derby. I really like that one, and had a brief tenure as a lawyer in a mid-sized law firm. She and her co-leader, Jean Friedman-Rudofsky, founded Resolve Philly in 2018, frustrated by Philadelphia's stagnant social mobility and intrigued by the role that journalism could play in driving equitable solutions to something as deep and entrenched as poverty. In the years since, Resolve's portfolio of work has grown, and Cassie has become a passionate speaker and thought leader on diversity and belonging in newsrooms, shared leadership, and building equitable organizational structures. And she's appeared on lots of panels. I'm going to short circuit that because it's too long a list and impressive, but she's also been a Boston marathoner and a power lifter. So she's pretty eclectic. What I'd like to start with, and I think we'll go back to Nancy to start this, is describe, I think we all probably have some idea what a public radio station does, but specifically your role there and how you find yourself working with academics when you do.
Okay, hi everybody. I guess, I'm a reporter, so not unlike any other reporter who works for a newspaper or a television station or a radio station. I basically cover news and do it in fairly traditional ways. My role is a little bit different sometimes than maybe other reporters, in the sense that I came on first as a managing editor and created the news operation that I'm now still a part of, but as a reporter. So I was an editor, I hired reporters, and I was completely involved in, making the decisions about what we would cover in New Jersey, and how to do that and who would do it, and collaborations. John Mooney and I worked together for years. And so I was much more of a manager and an editor and an administrator. And now I'm exclusively, I've gone back to being a reporter, which is great for me because I love it. New Jersey Public Radio was part of WNYC. And I guess the idea is that, the newsroom at WNYC is very New York focused. And, my mission all along has been to try to increase our coverage of New Jersey. A third of our listeners and a third of our members are in New Jersey. And I've long felt like the state, we know the state doesn't get enough news coverage, period. And it certainly doesn't get enough from its main public radio station. So that's a part of my mission as well. And, but with such a fledgling small team, you have to be really kind of brutal in what you decide you're going to cover and what you're not going to cover.
Okay. John, describe NJ Spotlight, and if you could also get into any work you've done with academics and sort of the basics of how that's been effective or not.
Yeah, let me give you a little primer on Spotlight to those who don't know who we are. As Susan mentioned, I am a print refugee, having come from the Ledger and Bergen Record, and 10 years ago when there was a lot of big buyouts. I'm keeping an eye out. I have a dog that may bark, so just letting you know ahead of time on that one. And we were launched in 2010 as a nonprofit news site with a couple of us refugees. It started with Two Beats. I was a longtime education writer and was co-founded with a longtime energy and environment writer with the Ledger. And we started with 4 of us and slowly grew out of that to now cover, probably a half dozen to 10 specific issues, policy issues in New Jersey. We have a full-time reporting staff of 6. I still do some writing, not as much as I wish I did, but have really, become a pretty successful news and analysis site covering public policy in the state. we also, and this may be relevant to our conversation as we go forward, have built a fairly robust events business of roundtables, doing discussions around specific public policy issues, pulling together panels, including from academia, to talk about everything from wind energy to maternal health to charter schools. We've done about 100 events over the course of our 10 years. And not surprisingly, we've shifted to virtual events over the last 2 years and have done 20 or 30 of those. And those have really turned out to be pretty successful for us. And I think, we call them live journalism. We and others call them that. And I think a way to reach people in different ways. And as I said, I think is really has a real promise for academia as well. A big change for us, and I should have included this in the old bio I sent you, is 2 years ago we were purchased by WNET channel 13/NJTV/NJPBS. They rebrand often, and we are now part of public media. We are the digital platform for NJPBS. Also posting their broadcast content, but also continuing to post our articles and content around public policy, broadened somewhat with, there's a daily broadcast that also has non-policy oriented things that come onto the site, but we're largely a public affairs site, but now under the auspices of public media. And that's opened a lot of doors and a lot of possibilities, including around the events. And then the last piece of what we do is around our newsletters. We have 2 daily newsletters and a weekly newsletter that have really proven to be our second homepage, if not our first homepage, in how people get our content. I've run into people who didn't even know we had a homepage. They just thought we had a newsletter that they get every morning at 7 a.m. and every evening at 7 p.m. And that's somewhat of a technical side of it, but it's a really important way of distributing content and may offer some opportunities to academia as well. As Nancy mentioned, we've been collaborating for a long time and actually having some new conversations around that. So, it's really in our DNA to be working with other media as well as with academia. We're part of the Montclair State Center for Collaborative Media, which is a big national group that really promotes partnerships both within the media atmosphere, but also with academia, in that case, mostly Montclair State. 2 of our columnists are from Rutgers. I'm trying to think of, one of them sort of stepped off, but Din Nambar at Eagleton is one of our monthly columnists. I'm always talking with people in academia. Julia and I used to talk a whole lot. I don't talk as much with her as I used to, but I will, in part because I've sort of stepped back a little bit in my role as education writer. But there are folks, Bruce Baker, and many folks in academia that I've worked with. We can talk about best strategies for op-eds, but that is something that is really important to us. I think it's really a great way to bring different voices into the public conversation, and we encourage it and welcome and work closely with op-ed writers and opinion writers to present their content the best ways we can. We're now actually starting to do some Spanish language content, including around opinion, which I think is an exciting opportunity as well. We're experimenting with all kinds of different ways. I, in the last couple of days, put out a query to folks to talk about what their version of the state is after Phil Murphy did his on Monday, or was it Tuesday? And that's another way of engagement, and maybe not so much directly with academia. You guys write longer than 30 words, but it is an opportunity to get some different voices in. So I'm more than happy to talk more about the different avenues that Spotlight would love to work further with you all. But we are a policy site. We do a lot of in-depth stories on specific policy. We get in the weeds. Some accuse us of being kind of wonky, But I think that there's a lot of opportunities for us to exchange ideas and stories and resources. So I'll leave it at that. It was a long answer to your question, Susan, but I hope
We're academics. We're used to long answers. Cassie, tell us about Resolve Philly.
Sure. Resolve Philly is a little bit different from certainly from WNYC, from public radio and public media stations and outlets in general, although we are a 501c3 and we have a number of partnerships with public media outlets. We are a journalism support organization that's focused on developing and advancing journalism that's rooted in collaboration, equity, and the elevation of community voices and solutions. And so all of our work, we have a number of different initiatives, and all of our work really centers around making sure that community members, particularly in Philadelphia, although we do work nationally in some ways, that folks in Philadelphia are accurately represented in news media, that the news media that's coming out of our local ecosystem is meeting the information needs of Philadelphians, that Philadelphians have not just a voice in the news, but are also active participants in the entire news production cycle. We have 4 primary initiatives. Our inaugural initiative, Broken Philly, is a collaboration among 27 local news outlets, all focused on reporting solution stories on social and economic mobility in Philadelphia. And so it's a 5-year reporting project. We have legacy institutions like the Philadelphia Inquirer and WHYY, our local NPR affiliate. And we also have trade publications like Technically and Chalkbeat, formerly the Public School Notebook, niche publications like Generosity, which focuses on social entrepreneurship and the nonprofit space in Philadelphia. We have non-English language publications and radio stations. We work with Telemundo and NBC 10, so we have television as a part of our collaborative as well. This is a long-term partnership. Broken Philly will sunset as a topical project in 2023, and these partners will continue to collaborate topically and substantively in other ways, which is also pretty exciting. Our second initiative, Reframe, is focused on accurate, more representative, more equitable news frames and language. And so we offer resources and workshops, courses, content and source audits to newsrooms around the country, working with their teams in better reflecting the community with their language and framing. As part of that initiative, we've also been developing a digital tool for the last 2 years. It functions a little bit like a Grammarly or a spell check. It's fed through input from the community, and it offers prompts to content creators to think about different words in the native writing environment. For the example that I always use is because we have all moved past, most of us have moved past the phrase illegal alien, which is so dehumanizing for just layers of reasons. And so if you were typing in your content creation system, whether it's Google Docs or Microsoft Word online, being able to have that flagged and offer suggestions from AP Style Guide, from the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, and then also suggestions that are directly from your community. We have libraries that are populated through community input that really offer terms focused on racial identity, ethnic identity, gender, sexual orientation, incarceration, a host of issues where we are learning, right, that these words matter. Words are so important to how narratives are framed, and that's, huge impacts on policy. I'll leave it there. Equally Informed Philly is an initiative that we started just after the pandemic took hold in 2020, and it really focuses on bridging the information divide between Philadelphians and news sources. So this is we do it in collaboration with our partners, but we've actually added a text component, and so we have a text text message newsletter that we send out twice a week to Philadelphians from specific zip codes. We attract subscribers. We get subscribers through really deep community engagement. We focus on very specific zip codes, those most vulnerable to the physical, social, and economic impact of coronavirus. And so we have really specific communities across Philadelphia that we reach through this text line, and also a community newsletter, the content of which is sourced and created by Info Hub Captains, which is a network of hyperlocal leaders that we have at the block level around Philadelphia, who are serving as points of information for people on their block. They tell us, hey, I talked to so-and-so, and this is something that's coming up. And then we're able to feed that back to our 27 newsrooms, who are then able to pick up stories and collaborate on different angles to really do storytelling and present reporting that is directly responsive to community needs. Our final initiative, which is just kicking off this year, is a local government accountability project. Philadelphia's next mayoral election is 2023. Philadelphia is a Democratic town. The primary is really the election to watch. It's going to be a pretty crowded field. If the city council primary in 2019 was any indicator of how much people want to see change in our community. And so we're really looking forward to a 6-year-long project that will last through the mayor's first term, that will be essentially a community-powered accountability tool. That was a lot. We are a tiny baby organization. We were founded in 2018, just me and Jean, until 2019, and we now have 20 full-time staff.
Great. That's quite an array of work from all three of you, and opportunities, I hope, for, my guess is, I know why I was excited about this panel was, how can I get my work out there? I know that sounds very egocentric and selfish, but I bet that's a common reason why people are here. So with that in mind, and I want to go back to Nancy, like, how can people who are listening to you here, how can they best promote their work to you in a way that would be useful, where you're likely to want to talk to them? Should they tweet at you? Should they send you their articles? Should they wait to hear from you? Like, what works best, or what is your advice for people in this audience for how to develop those kinds of relationships with someone in your position?
Right. Well, no shame in wanting to get your work out there, because that's what we're all about. I mean, what do you think I'm doing? Trying to get my work out there and wanting people to listen and read. I think the best approach, I guess I could peel off some of there were a lot of questions there. And so I don't think I would mind being tweeted at all. I use Twitter not that much, but I certainly use it as a work tool. So it's perfectly legit and fine to contact me via Twitter. I think the best advice I can give is to really understand how reporters do their work and how we think of stories. And so fundamentally, what is a news story? You have to think about who the audience is. For WNYC, our audience, I mean, we have an audience literally all over the world because of our online feed, but, our primary audience is the New York metropolitan area. So New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Westchester, Long Island. And so what we as the local news operation tied to, our signal, we're trying to tell stories that are of interest to the entire region. And so the bar for what is a story then, is defined by thinking about our audience as a regional audience, very different from, say, the Village Green in Maplewood, or Patch, or even the Bergen Record, which, has a much more geographically focused audience, and is going to dig into local news much more because everybody reading is from that area. So basically, when I'm thinking about a story in New Jersey, I'm thinking, is this of interest at the very least to anybody in New Jersey? But is it also of interest to New Yorkers? And, you know, so that's, I guess that's the first level is, you know, what constitutes a story for me, and what constitutes a story for me is going to be different than what constitutes a story for John at Spotlight, or like I said, the Bergen Record, or the Philadelphia Inquirer. So you got to think about, you know, what the news organization is and who's its audience is. And then, you know, I think often, you know, people feel frustrated with news organizations over kind of the bad news bias, and this idea that, you know, if it bleeds, it leads. And I think that, I guess I would defend our bad news bias, because for me, I mean, I have a tiny, when I hear about a staff of 20, I am just like filled with envy, because, you know, we have a staff of 3 to cover, and that includes an editor. So we have 2 reporters covering all of New Jersey. And so we have to be, you know, really, and so what are the things that are most important? And I think there are things that need to be fixed and problems. And that is kind of the main thing. People really need to know what's going on. So as much as I love doing fun feature stories about positive, wonderful things happening in our communities, I just don't feel like I have the luxury to cover that stuff. So we pick very carefully our spots and where we feel like we can have the most impact with our work. So I guess, you know, I say that to say, think about what it is, any reporter you're reaching out to, what it is that they're looking for, and what is their beat, and what are the stories they're looking for. And understand, you know, what particular reporters are interested in, and and that will kind of dictate where you go to pitch your story, your idea, or yourself as a source for a story. You know, and then I would say, you know, building relationships is always a good thing. And I don't think any reporter would mind being contacted by an academic who says, hey, I just would like you to be aware of my work, because somewhere down the road, you might need somebody to talk about this kind of stuff. And so can we hop on the phone and talk for 10 minutes about it? Or, you know, here's an email, you know, would you prefer an email? And I'll lay out the kinds of work that I do and how it might relate to the news. You know, and so I could go on and on about this, but I think the other thing to think about is what we in the business call a news hook. And that's sort of the idea of a news hook is what about this thing makes it a news story? Is it that the state legislature is about to pass a bill? Is it that President Biden just gave a speech about it? Is it that there was just a horrible fire and a bunch of people died, and so now is the time to be talking about fire safety or heaters in the winter or stuff like that? So that's the news hook, and that's going to be your best tool for making an approach to a reporter, is to say, hey, you know, you might be covering the fact that there's a redistricting commission. I'm thinking what I did today. There's a redistricting commission in New Jersey, and the maps for the congressional districts have been redrawn. Well, you know, I've been doing a mathematical analysis of voting patterns or of voters in New Jersey, and there's a way that this ties into redistricting. Like, if you can think about your work in terms of a news hook, that's the best way to make a pitch to a reporter. I think, did I answer? There was a lot in your question, but
I think that's a good start.
Okay.
And I'm hoping people in the audience will have specific questions that they'll share with Julia in the chat that we can relay to you. John, what do you see as a good working relationship with academics, including even things to avoid if you feel?
Yeah, I mean, I think Nancy, just to expound on what she was talking about, follow the news, follow what we're writing about, and I mean that's we've already sort of determined or come to a conclusion that this is news and there's a news hook on it. And if there's more you can add, I mean, I'm guessing everybody on this call has a specialty. They're not, you're not generalists. You all have your focus, and certainly as that issue arises in what is being covered by Spotlight or NYC or any number of sites, add your, email us, text us. I also am sort of a sporadic Twitter user, but I'd be thrilled to be getting a direct message. I don't get a whole lot. So, but in email, I'm happy to share my email. And I think it's on every one of my newsletters we send out. It's just jmooney@njspotlightnews.org. If there's something you can add to what we're writing about, or if there's something you want to comment on and we can't necessarily, we're not going to be coming back to it, but it might be worth an op-ed. As I mentioned, we're more than willing to work with folks on that. We've also, and this is something that I've really benefited from, the last 2 years where we've all become, Hollywood squares, is tapping into webinars and programs that are coming out of academia around subjects that we write about or broadcast about. And even if I'm not going to quote from it, it's a great way for me to get, an hour's lesson on remote learning in education or the digital divide or whatever it is. And if it's something like that, where I, can patch in for, 20 minutes, half hour, or the whole thing, that's really useful. And it may not immediately lead to a story, but you've informed me, and hopefully that's informed my writing and other reporters. So I think, it's not always about getting quoted. I think it's about helping inform us with the depth of knowledge and research that you have done on these subjects. So I think those are, sharing that kind of thing and not being turned off when we say we're not really writing about that right now. If you think it's worth 700 words and you have a good headshot, Spotlight's a good place to turn. So I think that there's lots of opportunities, and then, we can talk about events. A lot of those are somewhat organized before, we publicize that they're happening. So the panels are built. But if there's areas, again, that we cover that we may be doing an event on, and you think your voice or one of your colleagues would be a good addition to that, again, it's a conversation. I ultimately always agree, as Nancy said, on building relationships and, having getting to know that reporter who covers your area. Getting to know how they cover it, what kinds of things they do. We now, our broadcast side uses an epidemiologist from Montclair State all the time. She's on a couple days a week, really, and has had, extensive coverage and certainly raised her profile as well. So, that doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen. And certainly if you're in an area that's in the news a lot, it happens more than you think. So, that's really my quick tips on it. But, I'll go back to op-eds and the opportunities they provide. I think it's a great way to raise your profile on important issues.
Thanks. Cassie, you're facilitating relationships with a lot of different news outlets. And when you and I talked, I think the most exciting thing about that conversation was some of your future ideas, although I welcome your contributions on what you've been doing. But could you share that with?
Sure. I think so. First of all, we have a number of partnerships with academics, with academic institutions. We have a really close relationship with Community College of Philadelphia, with UPenn, and also with Temple being kind of our closest institutional partnership. And we actually have like a lot of long-term relationships with academics. We often, because some of our work is very studyable. we have a number of relationships with academics and a number of current studies that we're partnering with different, mostly media and communications colleges in different universities. But we both like to. We like to be proactive in those relationships, and so we will often reach out. We know that we need some attention, some academic attention, some research, some thought partnership around particular topics, and so we have different relationships that support those needs. We have a person on our team. She is the associate editor of community narratives, and her job is to actually work with non-journalists on writing for our partner publications. And so I think her focus is largely on members of the community who don't have formal writing experience. I think that there is a lot of opportunity for academics too. I say this with no shade. I have a master's degree in public health and my law degree, and I did not understand how to write differently. I would write these really flourishing, and Jean, my co-director, when we were first starting to co-author op-eds together, was like, girl, this is 1,500 words. You got to shave this down. And I'm like, whoa, this is the absolute shortest I could possibly make this. How would you take half of this away? So I think that there are definitely some tools and tricks that are helpful, even for really talented, very exceptional writers who are maybe not used to writing for a news publication. And so that is one way that we work with folks, not specifically academics, but not that we couldn't work with academics in that way. We love hearing from researchers. People will reach out to us all the time. And that's not even hyperbolic. I mean, I think we probably get probably 2 to 3 emails a month from different researchers from different institutions who have come across other academics citing Resolve and looking at our work, and who are interested from different angles. I think we are always excited for more long-term relationships with academics, and so if we do a lot of work in the spaces of child welfare and the foster care system. We do a lot of work around social and economic mobility. We do a lot of work around incarceration in the criminal justice system. So, those specific places, we do a lot of work around narrative and narrative change. And that's just such an amorphous, mushy space that, there we get a lot of folks from academia who are kind of figuring out what opportunities there are for research in this space of narrative change, which is a super sexy phrase that people are using now, but we can't really define. So our specific opportunities, I think, are more around research partnerships, co-authoring. We do a fair bit of co-authoring. We're a very collaborative organization. And so we, it's putting stuff out there for us, placing things within our partners, but also finding ways for us to honestly co-author more academic pieces. And so I think there are some additional opportunities with an organization like Resolve that might be different from a more traditional newsroom that's looking to place pieces in really specific content in really specific outlets or publications.
I have a longer list of questions, but I also really want to engage the participants. Julia, how are we doing on questions coming in?
We have a couple of questions and a comment, but do you want to maybe ask one more, or do you want me to read some of these? What would you like to do?
Well, I am going to kind of put our panelists on the spot a little bit and ask if you have any advice about what not to do. If you're comfortable, what kinds of mistakes do academics make in, you think you're going to be able to, whatever it may be. Is there any advice you have on that score? Nancy, let's start with you. You don't have to name.
Nothing, no,
just-
nothing really comes to mind. I mean, you know, I don't hear from, with the exception of Julia, I don't hear from academics all that much. She's my BFF. You know, mostly I hear from PR firms who and often they've got academics that they're pushing. And so they'll send out emails like, oh, this thing is doing exactly what I just said, that, you know, here's this thing in the news and we've got this expert, which should be more useful than it is, but it's just not. I mean, it would be if I was an editor of a big team of reporters and I had, you know, different reporters, we were covering so many different beats that the kinds of things that would come in, I would have the resources to deal with. So I think for some news organizations that works. For me, it doesn't work because we just do have such a limited amount of stories that we can produce. And so, you know, the chance that some PR company representing an academic pitching me a news hook on a story and that this is their expert, that's going to be the thing I happen to be working on, or even in my horizon of what I plan to be working on, is you know, a needle in a haystack, really. So I don't think that works that well, but I understand why I get those emails and what the purpose is of them. I wouldn't call it a mistake. You know, I think for me, you know, one of the big things is, you know, I need people, when I interview someone, I need a certain level of articulateness, if that's a word. You know, we work in a medium in which we need people's voices, we need tape of their voices, and we need them to be kind of pithy and clear and you know, and say something that is going to land with the listener. And I think that's the hardest thing for people. And it's not just academics, but obviously when you know a huge amount about something and I'm asking you to boil it down to this one, you know, to such a short little amount, it's hard. And you know, and I am able to edit audio, so I can fix that kind of stuff. But I think you know, I think most reporters do develop a stable of people they know they can go to who pick up the phone, are ready to talk and happy to do it on a moment's notice, and who have something to say that's clear and concise. And so when you find somebody who fits that bill, then you have them in your back pocket and you go to them over and over and over again. So, you know, and I will say one other thing, which isn't really answering your question, but the other place that I go over and over and over again is the Rutgers Media Relations Office. And I go to them more than and the Rutgers New Brunswick office, I go to them more than I go to Montclair State, more than I go to Newark, more than I go to Drew or, you know, or Temple or wherever, because I know that they are going to put me in touch with someone like within an hour, and that person is going to be like spot on that issue. Maybe, you know, not necessarily always what we call a good talker, but at least it's some like they know exactly what they're doing. They do their job really well, which is they know who the people are at the university who will do interviews about on the topics that we're looking for. So that's a tremendous resource. You know, and the other thing I think is just the mistake that gets made is just not getting back to us in a timely way. I mean, you can't overstate the importance of that. I mean, when you're on deadline, it's useless to call me when I'm on deadline. It's useless for you to call me back tomorrow. It just doesn't work that way. You know, and we just scramble to get stuff out. And I try to be clear when I reach out to people, like how soon I need to hear from them, because, you know, sometimes I am working on something more long-term. or I have a week or two. Often I have a week or two to put something together. So it's not always that I need someone right away, but when I do, that's probably the biggest mistake. And I think people are often very disappointed that they miss out on the opportunity to get their voice on the air because they didn't realize they needed to call me back so quick, or they just weren't keeping up with their messages or emails or whatever. So that would be probably the one mistake I can think of.
John, anything advice?
Yeah, I mean, I'll in the spirit, I'll be concise. Get to your point right away. Whether it's in an email or certainly in an op-ed, I mean, we have more space than ever online and a shorter attention span than ever. And if you don't make your point in an email or an op-ed pretty quickly, it's, our own attention spans. Cassie talked about 1,500 words. I'd get some of those and they hadn't even gotten to the point yet. And so that is brevity and it also helps, yourself being concise when you've gone through the exercise of doing that in your emails. But that is often the biggest impediment when I'll get something from academia where I've gotten the full paper as an email. And I'm still not quite sure what it's about. So I'll stop with that in the spirit of conciseness.
Thanks. Cassie, your thoughts or advice other than make it short?
I make it short, but I want to counter that a little bit by saying, I think one of the things that that journalists in my field, one of the things that we work with journalists around is like telling stories that are slightly more complicated and slightly more nuanced and have slightly more complexity, and not, kind of dumbing things down for your audience. And so I think brevity is good. Like, length is important, obviously, but also I think it's really important to it's not with the vernacular, not with the language, not with the words. I mean, there are, tips and tricks for what reading levels to write for, when you're writing for a news publication, but the concepts, the theories, the substance, the meat, that's super important. And I think that is one of the reasons why it's super important to work with researchers and academics and to include their content and their writing and their thoughts and their perspectives in the reporting, not just a quote here or a quote there. And so I don't want this to come across like I'm saying submit 5,000 word op-eds. Don't do that. But as you're writing, really kind of thinking about, all right, if you're cutting stuff out, what are you cutting out? And don't cut and then compromise the narrative. I think that complexity, honestly, now more than ever, is really, really critical.
Julia, why don't we move to some of the questions? And
Sure. We have a lot of really great questions. So just one quick, I guess, clarification, and this touches on what Nancy said. So there's a question from Joni asking if you all do refer to sources like Rutgers or Scholar Strategy Network in terms of determining whom to reach out to for someone where you don't already have an established source. So I think, Nancy, you addressed that in terms of Rutgers. I'm wondering about John and Cassie, if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that certainly through the media center, I mean, Google's amazing. I mean, it's a lot of it is doing that. There's a really just, and I don't know if folks are part of it. There's a new resource, New Jersey Diverse Sources list, which provides contact information for folks of color, and a lot of it is academia. A lot of it, I think it's being created out of Montclair State, so a lot of it is Montclair State, but there's also Rutgers folks in that. But there are, the internet has opened up wide how to reach out to academics on these things, and including social media as well. I mean, just sort of keeping an eye on that. And there's certainly some people, no doubt, the people in my field, being education in terms of the journalism, there are, I'd say 10 or 15 education academics in New Jersey who are quite active, and one of them's on this call. But I'm sure there's probably more than one who's on this call. And I'll reach out to those folks because I've gotten to know them, to a degree through social, but also through other relationships. So yeah, don't be shy on social if you want to get your word out. That's for sure.
Cassie?
Full disclosure, I did not know about Scholar Strategy Network until Susan reached out about this panel. So now that I know that it's a resource, I think it is a resource that we'll consult more. We have a relationship with the Mike Center, which is a partnership between Rutgers and Penn. Todd Wolfson is the Rutgers faculty that is, really supportive and has been instrumental in getting the Mike Center off the ground. Todd used to be on our board. We, have worked with Todd around research projects and certainly used Todd's research to raise money for ourselves. So this is a great resource. And I think for us, I would love to be able to share more deeply some of the things that we're working on and some of the ways in which we could see more collaboration with academics. And then Cassie at resolvephilly.org, reach out. I took a social media break, so Twitter is not really a good way to get a hold of me.
That's great. I'm sure we will find ways to partner. That would be wonderful. So Megan, there's a couple of questions that are kind of related, so I'm just going to read them both and let you guys take a stab at it. So Megan Williams wrote, I have several experiences with local media where I or others were quoted out of context, specifically related to vaccinations and the pandemic. I wonder how to work with media outlets to ensure accuracy of information within the limited time frame allotted. And she wrote we have tried in the past to say something along the lines of, please don't report this as a pro versus anti-vaccine, both sides context, because that is not scientifically valid and we don't want to participate in that, but that was only somewhat effective. So that's one question. And then there's a related question from Anne Gregory. I'm just skimming up here to the top. And that is, she wrote, I am contacted by journalists with all kinds of political leanings. I'm concerned that some may twist my work to fit their thesis. Any thoughts on asking to review a piece before it runs? So I think those are kind of bookends, right? So I'll let you guys, if anyone wants to be first answering that,
Yeah, I would, I don't think many journalists will share the piece. Now that's, I can't speak for all, and others can weigh in. But I think it is fair to ask, what are you going to use that we talked about? Now they may not answer, the reporter may not be willing to be very specific, or I don't know yet, but I think it's a fair question if you have that fear. What are you going to use? Sort of how are you going to depict, it's not an easy answer for a reporter, always, but I think it's a fair question. And if people ask me, I'll try to answer them. I think seeing the piece, generally that's Nancy, correct me if I'm wrong in your case, but I think that's a non-starter in most cases.
I agree.
Unless there's a real reason, if there's a section that's really complicated, and I might go back to a source and say, can you just look over this to be sure I'm getting it right to a degree, but it's certainly not going to be the whole piece. Even sending somebody's quotes, that's a fine line. Some people are willing to do that. I'd rather not, more out of interested time as opposed to, fears of it being, but also what happens is people see their words in print and it doesn't sound quite like what they thought it sounded like, and they start trying to change it, and all of a sudden we start getting these really convoluted quotes. So that is one of the perils of doing that. So, but it happens, there's no doubt, if you feel you get burned by a reporter, I'm not going to speak and defend all of them. People have gotten burned. There are probably a couple who thought that I burned them in some ways. I hope I didn't. And again, I apologize for the dog in the background. But then you don't talk to that reporter again, or you let them know, or you go to their editor and say something if you really feel that it hurt your reputation or really misconstrued something that's going to come back and bite you. Because one of the dangers of the internet now is nothing disappears. And so if they really got something wrong, I think, and you feel that it should be addressed, you should take that to them and or their editor. I mean, that's fair. Because as you know, it's going to stay out there for, virtually ever in this day and age.
Yeah, I would agree pretty much with everything you said, John. No, we would never give somebody, I would never give somebody an article pre-publication or a script for a radio piece pre-publication, but I think it's fair enough to ask for the quotes to be provided if you're really concerned about it. And I think really the problem is time with that. And, this is you have to, I guess it depends on how much you want these relationships and how much you want to get called back again, because obviously if it becomes a problem, then a reporter is going to go to somebody else. But it's also like fair enough to negotiate the rules of the game before you grant an interview. So, what's on the record, what's off the record, what would you like checked back with you before it's published? I think all of that is reasonable, fair game. And absolutely, if somebody gets it wrong, and getting it wrong can be not providing the proper context or taking a quote, publishing a quote out of context, then for sure request a correction. We make corrections all the time. We get things wrong all the time, unfortunately, and it's perfectly part of the the contract between reporter and source, is that if we get it wrong, we correct it. So yeah, I didn't really add much, but I agree with you, John.
I think you added. Cassie, did you want to add anything to that?
I don't really have much to add. Our organization has worked with members of the community who have gotten burned by collab members, by our partners. And we've mediated conversations, and that's been, it's not a scalable resource, but it's definitely been, I think, helpful in the cases where, we've kind of stepped in to facilitate that. And it's been pretty egregious. It's not just like, hey, they said this and I didn't like it. It's been like pretty egregious.
So I have a couple of follow-ups to that, and then I have a couple more questions as well. So the follow-ups are, how often, is it legitimate to ask for the questions in advance of the interview? How often do you send questions in advance to potential sources? And do you often conduct interviews via email? So I guess those are really pretty distinct. So let me start with the first one. How comfortable, how legit is it to say, could I see your questions in advance?
I rarely provide questions in advance. I don't really like to. First off, most interviews, I don't have a list of questions. I know where I'm going. I know I'm looking for what information I'm looking for, and I just have a conversation about it with the person I'm interviewing, for better or worse. So I'm just not that organized. But sometimes with the really important interviews or ones that I'm very nervous about, I will write a list of questions, and I will try to avoid having to turn over those questions for the most part. Usually, I don't think it's unreasonable to ask, what's the interview about? What kinds of things are you interested in? Why, what is the context for this? I don't have a problem at all with questions being asked about what the interview is going to be about, and I am fine about providing that. And then I rarely I'm a radio reporter, so I don't conduct interviews over email or in any form of text, because I need people's voices. Although in rare circumstances, I'm looking for some information, and I know I'm going to paraphrase it. And so I would, and I don't think there's any problem. I think a lot of journalism takes place in the written word, and I don't have a problem with that.
Great, thanks, Nancy. Cassie, John? how comfortable would you feel providing the questions? And do you conduct interviews by email ever?
A ditto on providing questions in advance. That I wouldn't, unless it was just, actually, no, I wouldn't, not for an interview. Sometimes they won't talk to me, but they'll only answer questions by email. And then, yes, I will submit some questions by email, and that would be like the governor or, somebody who I need badly enough that I can't just go to somebody else. But I avoid that as well. I think that's sort of skirting your obligations to the public. And increasingly we do interviews by email. I mean, I'm sorry for that, because I think you get a lot of the out of talking to them, talking to folks. I think it speaks to some of the nuance and complexity that Cassie was talking about. Nothing is all that simple, and some people don't frame it all that well. I mean, often when we do it by emails, they sort of sound like they're by email. And to be honest, we now in where we're quoting an email statement or a statement, we'll say that, and as opposed to an interview, because I think there is a difference. But yes, we do, if I need a quote from, a state senator, I'll often get it by email, and once in a while, and hasn't happened a lot, but it has happened, I'll do it by text. It's if it's getting me something that is going to help the story advance, I'll take it any way I can. But again, that would be somebody who, that I really need for the story, not somebody who I can just move on to the next person.
Cassie?
I've never been a reporter. Yeah, I this is all tracking with the things that I know about being a reporter.
Okay, I'll let you off the hook there.
Can I quickly also, just because it comes up from the previous question, know the rules of on the record and on background and not on the record. I think, it's worthwhile. Basically, when you pick up the phone, chances are you're starting on the record, but have that conversation before you start talking. Are we on the record? Are you just giving, that basically means that your name and your words can be used. On background is really, you're giving them background information, not meant to be your name, but you're giving them information that will help the story. It's not going to be attributed. And off the record is, do not use my name or this information. Now you're telling the reporter that information for a reason, because you want them to know it. You just don't want it used in the story, and you don't want your name used. But be clear with the reporter ahead of time, because that is where you sometimes get burned, because there wasn't a communication on what exactly you intended. But I have conversations off the record all the time with folks. That's where I learn information. That's where I learn issues. And then I'll say, well, can I use some of that as a quote? And then then there's some back and forth on that. But if they don't want it, then I won't. But I'm the wiser for it. People aren't talking to me because they want to keep something secret. They generally want it out there. They just don't want their name attached to it or anything that indicates. And I think, but know those rules. It will make a difference. It will save you a lot of heartache later.
That's really good advice.
Just to expound a little bit, the off the record is not something that can be done retroactively. So when somebody says something in an on the record interview, you can't, the reporter is not beholden to then, if you say, well, that's off the record, I don't really want you to use what I just said. Most times I will abide by that, because it's sort of being a nice person, and most of the people I'm interviewing are not like in the profession, they're not politicians, and they're, but if an elected official does that, no way. You said it to me and the rules. So, I think we treat different people differently because of their level of experience and their, who they are, their role in all of this. But in fact, we are under no ethical obligation to offer off the record retroactively. So that's a good thing to know, like to sort it out before you start talking, if it's something it's sensitive.
Great. So I have a couple of follow-up questions. This is obviously, you're hitting a very interesting and juicy set of questions here. So Lassie Branch wanted to know, is it legitimate to infer the leaning of a publication and make a decision on whether to offer a quote or not based on that? And another related question, unidentified, is it legitimate to, or would you recommend recording your interview if you're not 100% trusting the reporter, so that you have some recourse in case you are misquoted in some way? So is it legit to, I guess, do your due diligence and figure out if you want to talk to the publication, or do you have some sort of moral obligation to provide an interview regardless? And then should you record it if you're not sure you can trust them? Who wants to take those first?
I mean, I definitely would know, I would do research who you're talking to. I think that's totally legitimate to know, you know, what the publication is and the reporter. I mean, you can only tell so much. I mean, mainstream media is, you know, is it may easier or harder in some ways. But yes, I would certainly do your due diligence up front. And then recording, sure, we're probably recording you. So, so you might as well record us. I mean, Nancy, I don't know if that's a problem with you, but I mean, I'm guessing people record conversations. It's a little paranoid, to be honest with you. I mean, we're not here to catch you, you know, purposely misquoted or something. But if you think it protects you in case something goes wrong, I mean, I can't, you know, the law in New Jersey is you really only need one person to know you're recording. And that person could be you. So there's nothing preventing you from recording us, recording you.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that at all. And yeah, that's fine.
So one last related question, and then we'll move on to another area. So when you talk about on the record and off the record, if the person doesn't want you to use the information, not that they don't want to be quoted, but they don't want you to use the information, but you're able to access it from other sources, is there like a number of sources you need before you can use the information? Or if you just get one source that's willing to have it go public, are you okay to use it?
It's a whole range of things, because depending on what that information is, you can use it in different ways. So for instance, someone might tell you something off the record that you could then file an open records request for, or find the document in a court case or something. So there's lots of ways to get information on the record. It's hard to find information when you don't know what you're looking for. But once you're told what you're looking for, it's easier to find. So that's part of the purpose of having off the record conversations. When it's something that needs to be confirmed by a person and somebody's telling you, but they're not telling you on the record, you know, I think there are different standards, but for us, usually we would need two people to confirm something off, and then we would feel more comfortable using it. It's kind of dicey because, and I can't even say I understand it fully, like, well, I'm getting two people to tell me the same thing, but both of them are saying it's off the record, and which means not just that you can't use their name, and that's how most people think of it. They think it's that you can't use their name, but really what off the record means is you can't use the information. So why, if you have two people telling you that, can you use it? I don't know what the answer to that is. Maybe John could answer that one. He's a much wiser reporter than I am.
No, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if two off the records equals one on the record. You know, I'm not sure it works. I think Nancy is definitely right. Often somebody will tell you something off the record that you can then chase down elsewhere. And as she said, you've gotten smarter that it's out there. Oh, now I'll do a public records request. If I have two people who say, I can't tell you this on the record, and it's something that's, you know, that important, that may be enough but I would go back to those two people and say, can I use you as one of two sources? Not naming you, but saying an anonymous source, or, you know, that kind of thing. I don't want, if somebody told me something off the record, that stays off the record until I've told them otherwise. And we've talked about it and negotiated. But there is different gradations. Some, you know, if it's really sensitive, you're going to have 3 or 4. A lot of times people are telling each other, so it's only one piece of information. It's just 2 people heard it from the same person. So it's, there is some back and forth. To be honest with you, I'm not trying to dispel the questions, and obviously you're asking about them. It's not an issue that arises a whole lot with academics. Typically this is not a conversation. I mean, the one thing is they'll sort of, they'll describe some research they did and said, off the record, I think, I could have gotten more, on this information. That I understand they don't want to be part of it. But that, it's rarely, I don't want you to know this because it's so sensitive. It's often, they want to stick to the research they've done, but they had an aside that they want to share that, you may want to pursue, type of thing. So I don't know if that answers it, but I don't think our calls. Julie, you've worked with me. How comfortable do you feel going off the record with reporters? You've dealt with plenty of reporters. Have you been burned by anyone other than me, or
I've never been burned by you either. No, I generally only talk to reporters that I trust. Not that I necessarily agree with, but that I trust to be ethical. And I actually don't think I have been burned. It doesn't come to mind, so probably not much. And I don't record you guys when I'm talking to you. So not that I think it's a bad idea. I just trust you. But you can tell how cautious academics are by the nature of these questions, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. The questions are interesting. Hey, I just thought, by the way, I was struggling to come up with mistakes that people make. And I just thought of another one, which is reading your answers. That's the worst. It's just like, for one thing, it just makes for horrible radio. But I think even John would agree, like he's trying to keep up with somebody and take notes and get quotes. Although if you're recording it, I guess it doesn't matter. But, the best thing is to try to talk. Just like, imagine if you just got home from work and you're at the kitchen table and you're telling someone in your family, or you're telling a friend, this is what I learned today. That's how we want people to talk to us, just for our own purposes of building an engaging story.
That's great. Thank you. So I have a couple more questions. I think one thing, because people are starting to drop off because we're hitting the witching hour for families, is how would you want to be contacted? I know, Nancy, you mentioned Twitter earlier, etc. Are there some medium that you guys prefer over others? And then John shared his email, which I really appreciate. No pressure to share yours, but if you do want yours shared, put it in the chat to me. So if you just real quickly, how would you want people to reach out? Do you want them to tweet? Do you want them to text? Do you want them to email, or is there some other medium?
Email for me.
Okay.
Definitely the best way.
I'll put it in the chat. 1 second.
Yeah, I can put my email in the chat too.
Okay. It's going to go to me, so I'll just share them all after I get them. And
well,
Cassie,
you have my email.
I do. Cassie, do you have a preference?
Definitely email.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, just share if you don't mind. I can pull those. So okay. So the question the other question we have is, can you speak to how people from history or literature backgrounds can add depth to current issues? Is that something you ever look for? Cassie, you want to start with that one? I think that's more in your ballpark, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're big proponents of solutions journalism at Resolve Philly, and a big part of solutions journalism is really understanding the history and the context of a thing. And so I think, we do a lot of reporting on issues that are so deep and so ingrained in Philadelphia that we have to have an academic historical background in order to understand what we're even talking about. I think, an example is we are Northeast Philly used to be, big mecca for manufacturing. It's not that anymore. We are talking about solutions to bring manufacturing back to Kensington, back to Northeast Philadelphia, and what that would look like and what that would mean. And so working with historians in the business school at Temple to really understand the history of manufacturing in Philadelphia as a means for doing more solutions reporting is like a real tactical example of something that we're working on right now.
Great. John, Nancy, do you ever find that you need that kind of context?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's bread and butter. I also, solutions journalism, and I don't know, Cassie, if you're referring specifically to the solutions journalism
Brand
model.
name solutions journalism, or else, you know, we'd get the side eye from Solutions Journalism Network if I was talking about off-brand solutions journalism.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And Liza Gross, and I don't know if you've worked with her, and
She's actually on our board.
okay, well, there you go. She's one of my favorite people. But it's certainly worth, if you don't know the solutions journalism model, it's do some research on it, and there may be some avenues to reach into that. And it basically is a model that focuses on, you know, best practices around issues, not just writing about all the problems, but also focusing on what are potential solutions to it. So, you know, there may be avenues of reaching through that network into different programs. They have a bunch of collaborative models all over the country, maybe even globally. And so maybe you're talking to a bunch of Jersey and Pennsylvania and New York folk, but you know, working with them can get your content and your research into all kinds of different places, from here to California. And so it's a good connection to try to make as well.
Great, thank you. Nancy, do you want to add anything to that?
I guess the one thing, I mean, I talk to academics all the time for stories. So, you know, I do think it's always valuable to get people who are like dug in deep on an issue. So history or anything. What kind of sparked my thoughts about history in particular is that podcasting has become a really marvelous kind of new medium for telling stories and doing long form journalism, and history podcasts are huge. I mean, they're just super popular. WNYC has data like listener and audience development research basically that suggests that history podcasting is one of the areas that is underserved. History, science, and music are three areas that are, you know, the market for podcasts is just ridiculously overpopulated. That's the wrong word, but you know, there's like so many podcasts, and it drowns out, you know, it's hard to find good ones because you got to weed through so many. But the research that WNYC did sort of identified that science, music, and history were three areas where the people interested in those topics aren't as well served, and they're right in our wheelhouse for the kind of podcasting that we do. You know, that to tell stories historically, to do stuff with music, and you know, sort of music journalism, talking about the music, and science. So, of which, you know, we have Radio Lab and Science Friday, so we're already, you know, doing a lot of science, but we could do more. So the challenge is it's really hard to engage, like, you know, there you are you're doing your work, you're in your office, you're doing your research. How do you connect with a podcast when you don't even know what's being made until it's launched? So it's not the same thing as working, you know, reaching out to a reporter on a beat. You know, it's very hard to know what's in production. And I think, you know, so that's the problem. I think it's an enormous opportunity, but I think the problem is how to engage and make those contacts. And I think possibly the way to do it is to try to build some connections and relationships with some of the podcast producers in the area, of which there are many. And I'm talking about, you know, the shops, not like one person here and one person there, but, you know, whether it's Gimlet Media or Pineapple, or the one that does a lot of history with, help, I can't think of the name of it, with the guy, the revisionist history guy, Malcolm Gladwell, that company, I can't think of their name, but they have a name, and or WNYC for that matter. So or NPR. Like these are all shops that are producing high quality, highly produced podcasts. And you could reach out to them and say, hey, I'm a historian. I can, I love telling really interesting stories. That's what history is. Maybe is there any opportunity to pitch an idea or to work with somebody who's already working on an idea? We have a collaboration with the History Channel, and we have this podcast called Blind Spot. I attended a brainstorm session where we were brainstorming ideas for like seasons of Blind Spot, what we would do them on. So the opportunities there, it's just hard to find your way in.
Great, that's really helpful. So I have a comment from Leslie Branch, which is kind of related to getting your name into publication, which is a strategy I use is to look for very hyper-local publications who are looking for content. I'll pitch, it'll get published, and then with relationships I have with local cable, I advise that I've written or have been cited and would they like to have me on to discuss. And she said most times I get a yes. So that's free advice. And then one last question. I think we have time for one last question maybe, which is kind of a general one, which is that this person mentioned that it's difficult to write something that is timely as an academic, kind of fitting that moment. As you guys mentioned, that's what you're looking for in editorial content, and whether you had any suggestions for how to be able to adjust it on such a rapid turn cycle when you're trying to meet whatever the hook is of the day. That's a tough one. So I don't know if anyone wants to jump on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree with Nancy in saying if we call you or email you, hearing back soon is great. But it's not, I think all of us cover topics that aren't necessarily a one-day topic. So if you miss that story, that doesn't mean we don't remember you in the next story or the one after that. I mean, I'm writing about, as Julian knows, I'm writing about stuff I was writing about 10 years ago. And so the relationships we built 10 years ago continue to benefit us today. So yes, if you want to get in the story right now and, there was something that happened and that you think the moment may be lost, sure, you want to get back right away. But chances are we'll be revisiting it again. There's anniversaries of everything now, apparently, it seems.
So I think this question was specifically, I didn't do it justice. It was specifically about op-eds, but I think your advice is still holds, right? That it'll come back around again. So have it ready to go. Is that it? Okay. Cassie,
yeah,
Nancy?
and I guess I would add, excuse my
no,
my
please.
lighting and battery issues.
Oh,
but
sorry.
I would add, I mean, what if you're writing an op-ed, we're talking about what, 500 words, 700 words, 800 words. So, this is, I mean, the muscle memory of turning out quick things, of course, really helps. And if you don't do that often, then you're not going to have that muscle memory, but it is infinitely doable, to write 700 words about something a lot about, and that happens to be in the news right at this moment. So I guess I would encourage people to just, bang it out and get it out, because that's sort of what the medium requires, is this kind of quick churn.
We don't need citations, by the way. Let me say that, but links to what you're talking about, if they're, that is very helpful. You're saving us a step, a somewhat arduous step. And often we'll ask you, do you have a link to that research or that, other article? But no, we don't need citations in perfect form. That we've gotten those, believe me. But we've often said, can you take them out?
Thank you. Cassie, did you want to add anything to that? Okay, I think we're right at 5:28. I'm going to turn it back over to Susan, and we've hit all the questions and then some.
Yeah, and probably a lot more follow-up that could be going any direction, but I really want to thank everyone for coming, particularly Cassie, John, and Nancy. And I hope this was useful. And I hope anybody who is not part of SSN will join us, because we would like to have you, and building that kind of network can be useful for reporters who want to find you. So it's another way to get your work out there. So thank you. I don't think I have much else to say other than that.